One. Welcome to Better Together. I'm your host, Nick Allen. This is Union Month. And speaking of Union Month, we have Bryson Rasmussen here with the local Grand Junction Firefighters Union. We're really excited to have him. And Bryson, just go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself. When did you get into firefighting? What brought you into the profession, and how things have been going?
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Bryson Rasmussen been with the Grand Junction Fire Department now for going on 8 years. Um, I live with my wife and my son Charlie out in Fruita. I'm currently a captain assigned to Station 2 up on 28 and a quarter road in Patterson. Um, Previous to that, I was a firefighter paramedic. I still am a paramedic, but um, and yeah, really enjoyed working for the fire department. And on the union side of things, I'm currently our union president. Been the union president coming up on 2 years now, and been involved with the union basically since I started.
Awesome. Awesome. Were you a firefighter or EMT elsewhere before coming to Grand Junction?
I did right after I got my EMT. I volunteered for about a year and a half in Palisade, and
Okay.
also up Valley a little bit in the parachute area.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah. What are some of what's a little bit of a day in the life of Bryson right now? What does that look like?
Working or at home?
Let's
I'm
go with
guessing
work.
working.
Start with
Yeah.
work.
Um, so we work 40-hour shifts, and shift changes at 8 o'clock. So we typically try and get there anytime between 7:15 and 7:30. So we have a half hour buffer ish to do handoff with the other crew, but get a handoff from the other crew, any significant calls they ran, any equipment that's out of order or needing reserviced, um, and any to dos
Mhm.
for the 48 hours we're going to have. And then we get our stuff on the rig, they get their stuff off. We do equipment check on all the apparatus. And then we have a phone call with all the stations and our battalion chief, kind of setting out a plan for the next 48 hours. Same thing, letting us know if any equipment in any other stations out of service, etc. And then I meet with my crew at the coffee table. We go over the plan for the 48, talk about how our days off were, how everybody's doing physically, emotionally, etc. Making
Mhm.
sure we're all fit for duty. And then depending on whether we've had any calls yet to this point or not, and how many people we still have around the station, because the calls don't stop for that time period. So a
Sure.
lot of times we'll get interrupted while we're checking equipment or during that meeting. Um, but if we're all still there, we usually jump into a workout, or go to the store, depending on the vibes of the day. It seems
Yeah.
like it's going to be busy or not. Um, but then all throughout the day, we're either training or running calls, or there's a lot of to dos, and
Mhm.
each day kind of has separate to dos, whether it's ordering and restocking EMS equipment, doing kind of an extended equipment check or inventory on the apparatus. Um, and different crews have kind of assigned training days where they can go out of service and get more of an extensive training than what we can typically get away with while we're still in service, ready to call. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Totally. So you're there like for the full 40, right? You're
full
sleeping and
48. Yep.
okay, 40, 48. Okay.
Yeah. So 2 full days, get in a Monday morning at 8 and don't leave till Thursday morning at 8.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Gotcha.
Or
Tell
Tuesday,
me
Wednesday.
before obviously we'll be focusing on the union side, but yeah, tell me what it's like going on right now in Grand Junction for, overall infrastructure. I've heard before discussions around like response time is a really big thing that you all focus on, at least from like the EMT side or probably across the board. Like, how is the working with the city and getting some of those things done for the community?
Yeah. So as you know, Grand Junction's growing really fast, and we're trying to keep up with that growth. For a
Mhm.
long time, Grand Junction has been a very, very busy fire department. Our call ratio is kind of 85 to 90% EMS calls, um, and the other percentage, all the other calls, including fires and rescues and um, some of the technical rescue or hazmat stuff. Um, but we've also been able to, after the tax initiative to be passed, expand and grow. And so for the last really 4 to 5 years, we've grown really fast. And because of
Mm,
that, we've had to. But
mhm,
as a result of that, we're kind of a young department right now. Um, I think a large percentage of our personnel now have been here for 5 years or less.
wow.
Um, and a lot of the guys that retired, 5 or 6 years ago, they'll come to visit the stations and know maybe one person, maybe not know anybody.
Right.
Um, and so there's pros and cons to that. I think everyone's um, really excited and motivated and optimistic about the future and excited to be a part of this new department. And I think they're also, somewhat open to the change that's necessary with growth like that.
Mhm.
But also, we've lost a lot of really beneficial experience.
Mm,
Um, and that comes with its consequences as well. We're
sure.
figuring a lot of things out.
Right. Right. Well, when you talk about personnel and, bringing in new firefighters, still having some people that are stepping away, how important is a union to have in that work and getting your, fellow firefighters as part of this, whole operation?
Yeah, it's super important. One of the well, I think the primary benefit of having a union is bringing that line level perspective, or the boots on the ground perspective, we often say, back to administration. Um, all of our administration worked online running calls at one time. Um, but the fire service is a lot different these days than it was maybe when they were staffing the apparatus.
Hmm.
And also, it's not to their fault, but you kind of lose that perspective fairly quick once you move away from that role. And so, being able to provide that perspective and vice versa, um, a lot of times it's hard for the boots on the ground to understand either the needs or budgetary constraints, or kind of what the admin side has to deal with. And we act as kind of an intermediary to help bridge that gap and make it so everybody's working together towards the same
Hmm.
goal. Because for the most part, we want the same things. We just usually have different ideas of how we should go about getting to that end state. So,
Right. So really bringing that voice and understanding of, like, a lot of, like you said, boots on the ground, or like what exactly is going on. You got admin that are dealing with, a lot of top down work and trying to work through that. So sometimes, they need that additional perspective. And so you're saying the union can really bring that.
yep. Yeah, that's kind of our number one role is um, gauging the thoughts, opinions, feelings of the boots on the ground, and bringing that perspective and trying to articulate it to administration in a productive way.
Hmm.
um, the fire service is still very paramilitary, and so we work through a chain of command,
Hmm.
and we do so in the union as well, which again has its pros and cons. But a lot of times, by the time it gets kind of like telephone from um, the very bottom of the chain all the way to the top, some of the messaging can be lost, or um, the intent skewed a little bit, and
Sure.
that can be very frustrating. And so, through the union, people um, usually felt more heard. The tough thing with the union is we have to go with the majority, and
Hmm.
if you're not, in the majority, if you're the minority on one issue, that can be difficult too. But for the most
Yeah.
part, it's an improved method of communication for sure.
Totally. Well, and it's democracy, you know, at the end of
Yep.
the day, and it's, people having more say, and at least even if you don't get the vote, doesn't go your way, you still have a say. And
Yep.
that's, what we're even noticing coming out of this last city council race. People had their say. There was losers on one side and winners on the other, but we still have to move forward together, as a community. So speaking of that, we
Yeah.
just wrapped up the election. We had all union endorsed candidates win. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. Well, congratulations. Congratulations on
Yeah.
that.
And that's two elections in a row for us, I believe, where
Okay, there you
where everybody
go.
we've endorsed has won their race. So
Let's just put out
nice.
a quick notice to all future candidates. That's two for two. And
Yep.
yeah, how do you get involved in that? Like, what's the process behind the union engaging in elections?
Yeah, so that's another important piece of the union. As city employees, we're not allowed to meet with council as employees, but as through the union, as a union officer, I'm able to do that,
Nice.
which is important. Again, providing perspective. A lot of times, when council hears about an issue from our chief, it's not that he's not providing information, but for the most part, the time allotted to present the information is 15 minutes in a city
Hmm.
council workshop, and it's really hard for them to get the full picture in that concise presentation. And so
Hmm.
if we're able to meet with them outside of those, and we meet with people individually, we never meet with them as a group,
Sure.
um, but we're able to sit down and kind of get into the finer details of the issues, or what we're asking for and why, and how it meets national standards, etc. As far as the elections, we meet with each candidate as an executive board. Not all of us can make it every time.
Hmm.
Usually there's three or four of us, but we send out a questionnaire beforehand, um, trying to get to know them a little bit. Why you're running for council? What's your history? Why would you make a good candidate? And then also letting them know a little bit about Grand Junction and our organization, kind of what our short term and long term goals are, kind of where we've been and where we think we need to go, um, and why our organization benefits the.
Yeah. So what do you look for? Just yeah, sticking on this point for just a moment. Like, what do you
Sure.
look for in a candidate? Is it just like agree with all of our, points, or is it, on the person, or how do you balance that?
Yeah, I wish everybody agreed with all our points every time. We know they also don't have an easy job.
Hmm.
Trying to, again, it's they go with the majority, and sometimes they're not going to be a part of the majority. But
Right.
I think first of all, we look for somebody who seems to um, really be interested in making the community better. Um, Sometimes candidates' personal agendas, and everybody's got a personal agenda of some
Hmm.
sort, or a
Right.
reason they want to be on council. Um, you've got to go through all the trouble of putting on a campaign and volunteering that much time, etc. Um, but for the most part, we um, feel like we have a pretty good gauge on whether they genuinely want to represent the majority or their um, district, etc.,
Hmm.
and make the city better. And we look for what they prioritize, because um, from our standpoint, the two most important things that the city provides, or kind of what the city is there for, is public safety and roads are like
Okay.
the two big ones.
Hmm.
Whatever else they can do with the budget that's allotted, great, to make the city a better place, a more livable place, etc. Great. Um, but oftentimes we kind of lose sight of what's most important, um, trying to get some of those other things done. So
Yeah.
just reminding candidates why public safety is important, kind of letting them know where we think we sit as far as an adequate staffing level, or equipment available, etc., to make sure we're providing the service that everyone's expecting.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. So with this, speaking of making sure that we have, the most top of the line firefighting, unit, and just ready for public safety, and just keeping us all, protected. Like, what are some of the goals right now you have as a union?
Really, our big goal right now is collective bargaining.
Okay.
So currently, we work under a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, or a labor management agreement. The terms kind of interchange.
Yeah. Depending on who
But
you ask, right?
basically, yeah, basically, right now we just have a document that says that the local and our administration will try and meet at least 4 times a year. We'll try and get along, and that's about it.
Okay.
Um, there's a few little things in there, but it basically just recognizes us, not formally, but loosely as the employee representation group. And that admin will try and meet with us. But really, we don't have any sort of official seat at the table at any time. Our administration could choose not to meet with us or work with
Mm,
us anymore or recognize us as the employee group. Um, and for obvious reasons, we'd like to have a seat at the table. For us, we don't. Um, it's not our place to be decision makers. We don't want to necessarily even have a vote, but we want a um, a seat at the table that's protected to at least be able to voice our concerns or our opinions or our perspective for them to take into account when they make their decision. Um, so we have a collective bargaining ordinance. We're trying to get collective bargaining via city ordinance passed by the city council. We have an ordinance drafted and have presented once at a city council workshop. Um, with the change in council, we're going to have to present again. We kind of ran out of time with the current council.
mhm.
So we'll be meeting with them to go over that beforehand. And then I think we're, loosely scheduled to present again in July.
Okay.
Um, but the nuts and bolts of it are management rights for our administration are left intact. We don't want to get our hands messy in all of that. We just want to make sure our perspective or our seat at the table to um, have a voice is, protected. The
Mhm.
other thing a contract or collective bargaining does is I'm so I got on the department, mid um, 2017. Like I said, I've been here 8 years. I've still got 25, 30 years left,
Sure.
and I'm going to outlast this council, the next council, the council after that, and probably 3 to 4 more chiefs. Um, and it's difficult for us to have to reinvent the wheel every time there's a new council or every time there's and so with collective bargaining and a contract, we can have goals short and long term down on paper. And when a new council comes in or a new chief comes in, their hands aren't tied by the contract by any means to implement changes they want to in their position, et cetera, as the head of the department. But they can at least see kind of where we've been and where we're going as an employee group or as a department, and they're not starting over from ground zero every time. They can kind of
Mhm.
work their way in, and we can make changes together. Um, but when council's making decisions or when our chiefs are making decisions, they can see those long-term goals and say, okay, as I'm making this decision, how will this affect where we want to be 10 years from now? Instead of just approving things or not approving things and not realizing the consequences that has for kind of our long-term goals or where we're going. And also as far as, wages and benefits, um, if we have a history of, where we've been and studies like comparison basically
Mhm.
from comparable cities, um, when they improve wage increases, and then we come back, a couple years later or the next year, and we're asking for more wage increases.
Sure.
Um, they're not surprised. Like we just gave you guys raises because they know here's where we are competitive, and we know we
Mhm.
can't get there overnight, but we need to chip away at it. And so it just helps them make more educated decisions. that way, and it's important for us again not to feel like we're deja vu or Groundhog Day
Nice.
um, every time there's a new council or our administration. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, and especially when you mention that, like every 2 years there's an election for council. That's tough if
yep,
you're reinventing the wheel every time. And I think union, and I'm just wrote it down, is it's long-term success and stability that can be brought to our city. And that's huge from both the, employee side of, I can have, a laid out salary policy, for like the teachers or steps and lanes. When we negotiated my old job, like we set up a steps and lanes and like benefits, days, all this stuff in contract, right? And
yep,
so that can really, and I think you made a good point. It just puts the city in a good position too, of just knowing what they're investing in this and then getting that direct feedback from the workers themselves.
yep. And yeah, long term for the city and for the citizens. I mean, um,
Hmm.
it's hard to talk about wages. And obviously, we want to be able to make an adequate living and be able to put down roots here and afford to live in the city we're providing service to. But also, if we don't have competitive wages and benefits, it's really hard to recruit good people
Hmm.
and keep good people. Um, a lot of times, people and the fire service has really changed over the last 10 years, probably, but even more so in the last five, where 10 years ago there was 1,000 candidates for 2 spots, and it was really, really hard to get a job as a fireman. Now, it's kind of the opposite, where there's 40 positions and 12 candidates, and cities and um, fire districts are having to be very creative with how they stay relevant and are able to recruit quality people. Um, and the last thing we want is to become, this has kind of been our message for the last couple of years, is let's not become a stepping stone where people come to Grand Junction, we dump a bunch of money into, the training and equipment and their
Hmm.
wages and benefits, get them certifications they need, get them some experience, and then they can't afford to live here. And another department on the Front Range where their family's at anyway is now offering a lateral position, and they can go make more money, be closer to their family, and now they're more hireable because they have all these certifications and experience from us. So we put a bunch of time and money into them just to see them leave, and we've seen that a little bit. Um, Luckily, I think the culture of our department and Grand Junction is a great place to live.
Hmm.
We haven't really had that in mass numbers, but we have lost a fair amount of people. And typically, our attrition rate is about 10 a year,
Okay.
between people leaving for other departments, people retiring, and people leaving just because maybe it wasn't a good fit.
Hmm.
Um, so
Do you think having a officially recognized union could help with recruitment and get people to?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of it is they know their voice is going to be heard. Part of it is they know. So our three umbrellas of our purpose is wages and benefits and safe working.
Mm.
And so inherently, firefighting and EMS are dangerous professions. We know
Okay.
that going into it. Um, but we also want to live long, healthy lives, hopefully
Hmm. Hmm.
after the service we give. And so knowing that someone's looking out for your safety um, is important to people. And so that's probably our main role, is making sure whatever decisions we're making, whether it's staffing or apparatus purchase or policies, um, making sure all that stuff addresses safety for us one way or another, um, which again benefits the public because it's cheaper to have it's cheaper for the city to have a longer tenured employee than to do all the initial training and um, for new employees.
Hmm.
But also that experience is super important.
Yeah, yeah. Touching on the money, portion, and then we can just kind of hit the wrap up. But the pushback I've heard before, and some people on last council even mentioned it of, oh, if we recognize, the firefighter, it's gonna bankrupt the city. They didn't say that, but it's gonna cost too much. They can't afford to have a recognized union. What's your pushback?
So sorry, I didn't mean to laugh or
No,
smile,
it's
but
I laugh at it, but yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So it is their job. I mean, to be fair to them, it is their job to try and look at, they're in charge of the finances of the city and are
Hmm.
trying to be responsible with tax dollars. But there is no cost associated with collective bargaining or this ordinance. The ordinance that we're asking for just lays out what we can talk about, or what we can have in a contract. Um, and specifically, there's no direct wages tied in there. All we're asking for is the ability to participate in wage comparison study.
Hmm.
So historically, I shouldn't say forever, but when I started 7 years ago, 8 years ago, a third party did our wage comparison. I think we were doing it every 5 years. Um, the city found that they could save some money and had somebody qualified to do their own wage comparison. And so the HR director or finance or a combination that they did the wage study. And the problem we found, I think they do a good job.
Hmm.
A lot of times when we tried to participate, we were either told we wouldn't understand or it's not your job.
Right.
Um, but the problem we found is how they get their numbers is by contacting other cities or fire districts, and getting their current numbers. Well, those are the current numbers right now, and so we would
Hmm.
work to match those kind of a year behind, and then those other departments would increase wages that year, and then we wouldn't do a market study, and then they'd increase again, and we'd come back and do another one, and they'd be shocked
Right.
how far behind we were. Whereas we get our numbers from other departments' contracts. Um, and in the contract, usually, like you said, there's some sort of agreement or that's a little bit longer term, like over the next 3 years,
Hmm.
it'll be this percentage. So 3% every year or whatever it ends up being in their contract. And so we can kind of predict where people are going to be very reliably, and not be so far behind every time we do study. And so what all we're asking for is that we can participate in that process and provide those numbers. Not that we're going to, have a vote on what numbers the city of Grand Junction lands on, um, or be able to enforce any of that.
Sure.
Like the result could be the exact same, but
Hmm.
at least we can go to bed at night knowing that we provided them with the most accurate information we could to make the decisions they're paid to make, or to do what the city could afford based on um, the budget that year. But
Right. Right. Well, and again, it goes to consistency. It goes, you get a contract, like you said, 3 years out, the city can plan, okay, we need cost of living or whatever it may be versus, oh, we checked in 5 years. Oh my God, we're now 20% behind, comparable uh fire districts. We gotta,
yep,
rush this or whatever. And that harms our community. So
yeah,
I think
and
there's
historically, Grand Junction's tried to be. Um, we've had 10 comparable cities. We try and be in the middle, discounted 10% because we get to live in Grand Junction. And historically, it's been a little cheaper to live in Grand Junction,
mm,
than right now.
mhm,
Um, but currently, we find ourselves fighting to not be at the bottom. And I
sure.
think currently, after April, I think we're currently at the bottom of those 10 comparable cities.
Okay.
And also in those same comparisons, we try and run, um, you know, gauge how busy departments are.
Mhm.
And it's hard to do just call volume, because some of those comparable cities have a lot more. Um, it's a lot bigger area because it can cover multiple cities. That makes sense. We break it down to calls per firefighter, and we are frequently either number one or number two in that calls per firefighter. So basically, like per capita.
Hmm.
per employee number compared to call volume, we are really far up there. And that makes it really hard for us to recruit. Hey, come work for this fire department. You're going to be
The most work
really
for the least
busy.
pay.
Yeah. Yeah. You're going to run more calls than anybody else and get paid less, but you get to live in Grand Junction. I know you can't
Sure.
afford a house, but still, you can ride your mountain bike.
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and we,
Right.
like I said, culturally, we do, I think it's a really great place to work still, and will always continue to be that way, hopefully. Grand Junction is a great place to live.
Hmm.
We do make, you know, good wages. We have good benefits. We're happy with our jobs. But we don't want to fall so far behind where that's not the case anymore. Where we have people leaving, where we can't keep good people, and where, you know, the citizens of Grand Junction aren't getting the service they're expecting when they call 911.
Right. Awesome. Well, Bryson, thank you again for joining us today. That brings us to our time, and we just again, this is Better Together. This is Union Month. We're interviewing union leaders across Mesa County and the Western Slope. There's gonna be more to come, but Bryson, thank you again for your work. Thank you for leading this union and into a new future, I hope, and I
Yeah.
think it'll be really great.
Thank you, Nick. It was a pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you all. We'll be having some new updates coming, and make sure to be tuning in. So when Bryson's up there advocating for the union, we'll make sure that word gets out. So have a good day, everyone, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, y'all.